And so how do we have a different relationship with politics where we understand what it is that we're trying to work towards, yet the means and the solutions need to still be discovered? I'm a strategic designer. I wear two hats. One of them is I'm a professor of practice at Aalto University. And the other one is I run my own practice. I work with governments and development agencies around the world. I guess I'm a bit of a mutt. I'm from Finland. I was born in Jyväskylä. Probably most people don't know where it is, but it's in central Finland. But I grew up in Rome, in Italy. And then eventually, I ended up doing my formal education, meaning my undergraduate and graduate work in the US. It's interesting growing up across cultures, because when growing up in Rome as a kid, and here we're talking about, late 60s and 70s, I was the odd boy out. I was the immigrant, but I felt very much part of that culture, and yet I was very much also a Finn. And I think you develop skills that people would nowadays call third culture skills, is how do you work across different kinds of cultures? And if I took a big leap from there to today, is that I think the work we need to do in public institutions is, in a way, rewire them. How do people with different backgrounds work together on issues that cut across ministries, that cut across domains of knowledge? And so I think this cultural background has been useful. So for me, what design contributes, because there's many disciplines that do that, what's unique about what design brings to the table? I think, first of all, it brings visual tools. I think some of these challenges we're facing are very difficult to understand through the tools of numbers and words. And then we inherently have a way that we're drilled in to sort of operate in, which has become a bit too much of a buzzword, but it's we prototype things, we model things. We translate ideas, concepts from our mind in the real world, and in doing so understand how our idea is actually biased, limited, incomplete, whatever that might be. And then by making something, it creates feedback for you. Oh, people didn't like this. Oh, we forgot to do this. Oh, it's not buildable. Oh, we can't manufacture. Oh, we can't finance it. By actually understanding those details, you can shape back the concept. If we're in a world where the solutions that we need don't exist, we need to discover them. And one of the best ways to discover things is by making and learning along the way. So design for me is ultimately a way of seeing, of bridging between how we feel and what we can count, and then also managing risks and opportunities as we uncover things. And these are the kinds of skill sets that we're really missing in our public institutions. I've been interested for a long time about the term creativity. I've also been annoyed by the term. I'm annoyed because people in my community, I think, have hijacked that term and have branded us as part of the creative sector. Are we suggesting that everybody else is not creative? Right? So what gives us the right to say we're creative and others are not creative? So I think we need to expand this to say there are many different kinds of sort of creative endeavors. So that's number one. Then the second question is, what makes for creativity? What do we mean? So then we need to ask ourselves, what's the environment that's going to help us be creative? Is it a high stress environment or is it a relaxed environment? And all the science of the brain tells you it needs to be a relaxed environment. If we're in a highly stressed environment, we're going to be in a fight or flight mode. We're trying to figure out if we need to attack this thing or run away. And then your cone of vision, your mindset narrows down to focus on the threat. And you're least likely to want to entertain things that are not in that field of view. You're least likely to make new combinations of things. Now, I say this, why? Because I think increasingly our public institutions are high-stress environments. People are being asked to do more with less, faster. And they're trying to respond to things that they can't respond to alone. They need others on the other side of the wall. And at the same time, we're asking them to solve questions that are increasingly creative in nature. We have to solve things we haven't done before. So if I think of what is the environment that we need to do, is we need to quite literally think about how do we change the environment, the psychological environment, so they can start behaving differently. And through those behaviors, the institution can start to behave. And I think too frequently we look at how do institutions need to be from a kind of structural, or everybody needs to think creatively. Or the other thing that drives me crazy, we need more toolkits. If people are highly stressed and you give them a toolkit, I think they're going to get even more stressed. Now there's one more thing they need to think about as they're trying to fight for survival. And so this enabling environment, the low stress environment, is, I think, also a design challenge, because we need to redesign organizations. It's an organizational design question from a very basic principle, which is how do we enable brains to make better and new kinds of connections? I found some very low-level, simple things. I used to run meetings in a public sector organization, very high stressed. People come to the meeting, highly stressed. There's a regimented way of doing, and we would generally make decisions that were far from optimal. So I was like, let's stop doing that. I took people out of the building. We went for a walk, and suddenly they behaved differently. It's amazing how conditioned people are by even the physical presence of the institution that they're in. And if nothing in their environment changes, how can we expect that their behavior will change? So one of the things, just to add to this conversation, is the enabling environment is not just a question of, hey, let's put some jazz on and let's dim the lights and then people will chill. No, I think we need to think in a slightly more sophisticated way what relaxes the brain. And a lot of times it's things like rules and regulations of an organizations that work against what people are being asked to do or what people are trying to achieve. So I need to be, work in a fairly dynamic way. I see that in this project, things are actually need to change and so on. And then all the instruments and all the rules and regulations say you can't do that. And you need to seek permission. And that's a 6-week process. So there's nothing agile that's going to happen. So actually, a lot of the work that I've done beyond taking people to meetings outside for a walk is also going into the rules and regulations of organizations and redesigning them. How do we create rules and regulations that actually allow people to behave differently? So it's a combination of things. It's small practices, but it's also the big back office kind of structural stuff. I think we all recognize that we're in a moment of great change, and the logics of the past, while have been very useful, aren't necessarily the logics that are going to take us into the future. So what are some of those logics? I think there have been logics of specialization that are then reflected in the ministries we have. And the idea that a lot of the work that then happens in these ministries about improving the current efficiencies of how work is done, and therefore it's about diving deeper and deeper into these categories or these departments, et cetera, et cetera. So that's taken us to a certain point, and we still need to do that kind of work, but increasingly the issues we're dealing with cut across. So a lot of the work that I've been involved in is how do we make organizations operate through what we would call cross-functional teams? How does an engineer, a politician, an economist, a designer, an anthropologist, a doctor work together to understand more holistically the challenges that we're operating or trying to respond to? So that's one thing. The other one, which I think is a complicated issue, is an issue of the politics that we have. I think we've grown over the decades to an idea that politicians will tell us where the future is. And then if they change their mind, we'll call them liars. I think we need to have the ability to say that we're working on this, but we don't know exactly how much it's going to cost or exactly what's going to happen when. We'll figure that out as we go along. That's a very different kind of relationship, and we always have to be accountable to what we said we're working towards, but maybe we don't measure accountability in terms of how many euros did you spend today versus tomorrow. I think the bigger trajectory is the important thing. So we're talking about ultimately organizational design, and we're talking different ways of resourcing things. And I think the thing in between them is creating an environment for discovery. So then there's the big question, I guess, at least in my world, is if we're talking ultimately about we need a different logic of work, we need to organize things differently, and we have to enable fundamentally a different way in which people interact with each other and the environment that they're in. I think the traditional, I'll call it change management, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I think some of us would associate that with designing new organizational logics, which might be new boxes, and then reorganizing people into those new departments, and then hoping that it'll create something good. So you're going to give all the pain up front with some vague promise of better in the future. So I think we need to invert that. So I think a lot of this happens by creating new realities in organizations, by working, let's say, at a team level to create a new way, prototyping a new way of working, perhaps you could think of it. And as people realize that this actually is a better way to address this issue, figuring out how more people can start working like this. So you start creating a new logic, and if you're successful, you'll attract more customers to this logic. And when your market of ideas is broad enough, then you can say, hey, we need an organizational form. So I would say the behavior first, then the form after, not the boxes first with the hope of a new behavior. I have some thoughts about how we can get people to behave differently. So we can't innovate through the boardroom. We need to innovate through people's new experiences. I think if we look at this generation of leaders, and especially the previous generation of leaders, they came out of a society where an industrial way of working and an idea of division of labor had brought about a lot of benefits. And we saw incredible growth like this. And so they were deeply instilled from the moment they were born through their education system that there is a certain way of working that is valued, and there's a certain model of governance which is good. And so they began to experience from a child growing up, their first job in public sector and so on, what good governance looks like. And I don't think a lot of people have had radically different experiences of governing differently that can be more effective. So I think if we're working in a project or at a broader initiative, I think we as designers can help create the conditions to do things differently. And through that experience, get people to have an aha. And then if we're very smart, we bring the first people along who have good social networks. So when they have an aha moment, that aha spreads through their social networks to their friends, and their friends are more likely to want to listen to you next time and have potentially an aha moment. So we need to figure out how these kinds of experiences can nudge other people to try other ways of sort of working and not confuse it with just doing fun stuff. I don't mean to denigrate fun stuff. It needs to be fun and meaningful and purposeful and impactful. When you get that combo, that's great, because fun is the friend of learning. It's hard to learn without fun. So let me give you a little bit of positive news here. I don't want to be the doom and gloom guy. The big narrative is I like to take people back thousands of years. Let's just fictionally imagine the moment the first humans were on this planet, okay? They looked around, and what did they see? They saw sticks and stones and trees and rocks, right? None of the stuff that we have here existed. If you imagine that this story of human development has been able to, through its sheer imagination and capacity to learn, transform sticks and stones into the things we have today, that is just mind-blowing. So, yes, we got big problems. Yes, there's no solutions, but neither did they have any of the solutions. And yet we were able to create all of today. So that gives me great hope, and we have to always return to this idea of the sheer capacity of human ingenuity. Right? To unlock it, we need to work together. That's another issue. I've had the opportunity to work in government context in many parts of the world, some fairly challenging, and you will find everywhere you go that this human ingenuity is creating real realities, new realities that operate in a completely different way that are really what we're looking for. And to kind of butcher a kind of saying that we use a lot, the future is here. It's just lost in the noise of today. So these are the smaller stories that then tell me, ooh, this big narrative is not just a story I tell myself. It's actually happening, and the great thing about it, it's happening in the middle of this chaos of today. So I think our job in part is finding these stories and finding ways in which we can expand those stories, rather than imagining that we need to create everything from scratch.